So, welcome everybody to the second Man Culture Conference, Time for Action. So, I just thought I'd start with a couple of quotes just to get you thinking about why we've changed so last year it was time for change. This year we went for time for action. Why did we do that? So a quote from Mark Twain, action speaks louder than words, but not nearly as often. And the second is, and I'm going to give this to Simon Sinek from the American ex-Navy SEAL and now leadership guru, I think they call him. So I'll give this to him. I don't know if it's his, but it says, words may inspire, but only action creates change. So just be thinking about that as you go through today. Hopefully it'll be inspiring, the content will be inspiring, and we really want to get you thinking about the change that we can all make from being in this room and then moving forward. We've got, so I'll start with housekeeping. So if you haven't found them already, toilets are down the corridor, out to your left, my right. Fire alarms, there's no planned fire alarm today, so if the alarms go off, we will need to leave. There are numerous fire escapes, so there's one that way, there's a door out to the left here. We can also use the doors out the back depending on the situation. So, but like I say, so if there is a fire alarm, then please leave in an orderly fashion. You'll be behind me, I'm sure. So we've got Nathaniel Cole with us here today from Everyone's Invited. I'll introduce him more when his slot comes up, but we're really excited to hear what Nathaniel's got to say to us today. Workshops, as I've said, hopefully really thought-provoking, get you thinking about how we can use those workshops going forward. You should know where you're going. You should know which workshop you're in. If you don't, find one of the team either in red or white polo tops. Just find us and we'll let you know where you need to go and where you need to be. Slido, we've got a QR code. Please use it. Pre-feedback, post-feedback, because that helps us to know what we're getting right and what we're not getting right. But also, we want to use it for the Q&A. So there's a Q&A at the end. Whenever you think of a question, get it up on Slido so that we can then not control the questions, but just understand what kind of things you're asking about and the subjects that we're going to have our panel go through at the end. I think that's about it from me. So I will, I just wanted to say this, so we did this conference last year. It's great to see some new people here. It's great to see people coming back for a second time. It's been a interesting year for us as a group. We've really started to move things forward. We've started our workshops. We've started our conversations with the fire service. We've started our conversations with the police around getting into those organisations and really kind of getting to the heart of masculinity and why it matters. Hopefully you'll see the Man Culture Workshop today, and hopefully you'll be able to give us some feedback about how it's received. It is being done to a very big audience, so normally we'd only do it to 10 or 15 people, but we'll test today with up to 100. But we really hope you'll find today interesting, thought-provoking, and really start to challenge us around what we need to do next and what everyone in the room can do next to kind of deal with violence against women and girls. Okay, so without further ado, I will introduce our first speaker. So, and I had to ask her for a job title, even though she works with me. So we've got Meghan Field starting off today, Strategic Lead for Domestic Abuse and Violence Against Women and Girls. Delighted to have Meghan here again. She spoke to you all last time to update us on how the city's doing. Meghan has a wealth of experience and expertise in this field, and it's great for her to come and talk to you all about what's going on in the city. Meghan.
All good? Oh, there it is. There I am. Hi. Good morning, everybody. Like Matt said, I'm Meghan. I am delighted to be here. It's a real honor to be in my 20th month as your Violence Against Women and Girls Strategic Lead for the city. Before I get into the bulk of my talk today, I'm going to invite you to join me in a bit of presencing. I did it last year, and if you've been to any workshop with me, or any speaking engagement with me over the last 20 months, you've probably heard this before, but every time I read it out, I think it impacts us and lands in our hearts and our minds in a different way. So if you feel comfortable and able to, I invite you to perhaps close your eyes or lower your gaze. The work we're going to do here today and the work we do to end men's violence against women and girls is really important work. It's work that involves passion. It's work that involves a lot of drive and energy, frustration. It's work that is meaningful and important. And I'm so grateful that each of you are here to be part of the coordinated community response to violence against women and girls today. So I'm going to read Brave Space by Beth Strano as an invitation for how we can all join together today to continue our work. Together, we will create brave space because there is no such thing as a safe space. We exist in the real world. We all carry scars. We all have caused wounds. In this space today, we seek to turn down the volume of the outside world. We amplify voices that fight to be heard elsewhere, and we call each other forward to more truth and love. We all have the right to start somewhere and continue to grow, and we have the responsibility to examine what we think we know. We will not be perfect. It will not always be what we wish it to be, but it will be our brave space together, and we will work on it side by side. So if you feel comfortable taking a breath in, letting those words land. And when you're ready, coming back. Okay, so it's my task today to talk a little bit about what we've been doing over the last year since the last Man Culture Conference. But I thought I'd start as a reminder to sort of why we do this work and what violence against women and girls is and why it's so important. So, violence against women and girls covers a continuum of everyday experiences and crimes that have been identified as being committed primarily, but not exclusively, by men against women. Violence against women and girls is not a new phenomenon, but one that continues to garner significant national attention due to its prevalence and the sheer number of serious incidents, including high-profile murders of women and girls by men. In 2024, violence against women and girls was declared both a national threat by the UN and a national emergency by the Police Chiefs Council. And the Labour government pledged to have violence against women and girls in the next decade as part of their campaign. And this is not surprising when 1 in 3 to 1 in 4 women will experience some form of violence and abuse in her lifetime. And 14 women, not 2, 14 women lose their lives to domestic abuse every week when you combine homicides, suicides, and unexplained deaths in the context of domestic abuse. Violence against women and girls is unacceptable and preventable. And it affects the lives of millions here in the UK and billions across the planet. Crimes and experiences of violence against women and girls are many and varied, as you can see on the screens. They include rape and other sexual offenses, stalking, domestic abuse, so-called honor-based abuse, including female genital mutilation, forced marriage, and so-called honor killings, revenge porn, upskirting, street harassment, and online abuse, as well as many other forms. While different types of violence against women and girls have their own distinct causes and impacts on victims and survivors, what these crimes share is that they disproportionately affect women and girls. Violence against women and girls, or VAWG, as we call it, should be understood as part of a continuum of experiences which can happen anywhere, at any time, to any woman or girl. Violence against women and girls takes place every day. These experiences are deeply harmful, not only because of the profound effect they can have on victims, survivors, and affected others, like their loved ones, but also because of the impact they have on wider society, impacting on the freedom and equality we should all value and enjoy. These impacts can include day-to-day decision-making, but also extend to social and economic costs to the economy, society, and the taxpayer. We know that the devastating impact of these crimes can include loss of life, the destruction of homes, futures, and lives. Everyone should have the freedom to succeed, and everyone deserves the right to public safety and protection under the law. This is as true for women and girls as it is for anybody else. Violence against women and girls is deeply rooted in gender inequality and men's sense of entitlement. This gender inequality intersects with multiple overlapping and structural inequalities such as race, ethnicity, religion, sexual orientation, gender identity, disability, and age, and other characteristics that shape women and girls' experiences of VAWG. Any consideration of VAWG must have an intersectional analysis of how this abuse is being perpetrated and experienced at its core. So basically, this is an issue that we know touches the lives of the majority of people in the UK, and Plymouth is no exception. So I'm going to talk to you a little bit about the Plymouth context. That was my TED Talk. Now I'm going to talk to you without looking at my notes too much. Okay, so what's going on in Plymouth? 21% of all crime in the city is domestic abuse related, which is higher than the national average of 16%. And when you include all forms of violence against women and girls, the percentage of crime in Plymouth goes up to 37%. A significant amount of crime is VAWG related. Well, we know that, and this hasn't really changed too much over time. Well, we know that nationally, the police respond to a call for assistance to domestic abuse every 30 seconds. And yet only 1 in 5 women victims will report their abuser to the police. So this means that most people who are causing harm are not being held accountable through the criminal justice system. Signs of abuse regularly come to the attention of other services, including all of you in the room today, and people around the victim and the perpetrator, like the people who are working with the victims and the perpetrator, often see this long before it reaches the criminal justice system. And so, but unfortunately, a lot of opportunities for missed intervention and support happen, and we'll talk a little bit about that later. What we know is that the crimes of like domestic abuse, sexual violence, we know that they remain gendered. So when we take a look particularly at domestic abuse, 71% of victims are female and 73% of people causing harm are male. What we also know is based on national estimates and the Plymouth population, 36,000 women in the city will experience at least one form of violence, abuse, and harassment in their lifetime. What we also know is that since 2021, Plymouth has, I'm standing with my hands on my hips, y'all. I'm like, it's statistic time. All right, put my hands down. So what we also know is since, this is also very low. I'm just gonna take this off. Is that okay? Allie, where's Allie? Is that, all right, thank you. Now I feel better. Okay, so we also know since 2021, we've commissioned 7 domestic abuse related death reviews, formerly called domestic homicide reviews. Which means that whether that's suicide or homicide, what we know is that we have a huge amount of people losing their lives, way too many. 1 is too many. And that we're also involved in 4 out of area reviews, which means that the victim and or the perpetrator had significant involvement here in Plymouth. So that's 11 deaths in 3 years as a result of domestic abuse or having to do with domestic abuse. What we also know, as our public health colleagues have done over the last 10 years, have done significant amounts of research with year 8s and year 10s across the city. They've asked year 8s and year 10s the same questions every 2 years for the last 10 years. And what we know is that 25%, or by year 10, 25% of young women in Plymouth had experienced hurtful or threatening language from their partners. What we also know is that that same survey showed that 15% of year 10 women, young women, had experienced pressure to have sex or do other sexual things. 12% of young women in year 10 in Plymouth had been threatened to be hit by their partners. And 12% by year 10 of young women reported that their partners didn't listen to them, even when they said they didn't want to do something sexual. When we're talking about those numbers, 12% of our year 10s is about 2,000 young people. So that's a significant amount of young people who are experiencing these issues. The roots of violence against women and girls already by the time they're 15, 16 years old. When we talk about domestic abuse in particular, we know that domestic abuse has the highest levels of repeat victimization of any crime. National estimates indicate approximately 400,000 perpetrators are causing medium and high levels of harm, including murder, across England and Wales every year. Yet fewer than 1% of perpetrators get a specialist intervention that might prevent further abusive behavior. When we took a look last year at our MARIC, which is our multi-agency risk assessment conference, which meets twice a month to discuss high-risk domestic abuse cases, we took a look at most high-risk repeat perpetrators of domestic abuse. And there were 35 perpetrators, so 8% of the perpetrators that came to the MARIC had 2 or more victims. 1 had 13 victims. When you looked at those 35 repeat perpetrators with 2 or more victims, when we counted up their adult victims, not even their child victims, their adult victims, it was 131 victims for 35 high-risk perpetrators of domestic abuse. The University of Bristol, our friends and academics there, did a huge piece of research a couple of years ago, and they looked at the cost per MARIC case in the cost per victim and per perpetrator. And so that cohort of 35 prolific perpetrators cost Plymouth Services £4.5 million alone. And that's just a small little slice of what's happening in terms of domestic abuse. Also, what we know is that domestic abuse is part of adverse childhood experiences. We know that as of the introduction of the Domestic Abuse Act, children are considered survivors in their own right. And so what we're seeing is that just in that high-risk group, we're seeing over almost 600 children, child survivors, coming through our MARIC every year. So we're having at least 600 children who are survivors in their own right from high-risk domestic abuse here in the city. So those are pretty sobering statistics, I would say. There are statistics that you might have heard before if you've heard me speak, if you've come to any of our workshops, if you attend the Domestic Abuse and Sexual Violence Statutory Partnership. These are not unfamiliar statistics to us who sort of work at the core of this, but I think they're really important. But what sits behind those statistics and what do we do about them? I think taking Matt's invitation to think about action is really what I'm here to talk to you about today. So what do we do in the face of this much crime, this much abuse, this much violence against women and girls, which starts at very young ages for folks here in Plymouth and nationally? So what have we done in the last year? Well, I spoke to you last year about the VAWG Commission. So the Violence Against Women and Girls Commission took place on the back of the tragedies of the Keyham shooting and the murder of Bobby and McLeod. The VAWG Commission report was published in May 2022. After receiving huge amounts of evidence, bringing together specialists and experts from across the city and across the UK. And it had 15 recommendations with 4 key areas of work to drive culture change needed to challenge men's violence against women and girls, to support women and girls who've been subjected to male violence and abuse, to create safe places and spaces, and to ensure that the building blocks are in place to enable real change to happen. So when I came into post, myself and my amazing team who are all here today, Verity and Lisa, and Lauren, our peer researcher, we recognized that there was a huge amount of work going on in the city, and there was huge ambition to meet the ongoing needs that we were identifying. And so what we did in partnership with many, many of you here in this space today is that through the Domestic Abuse and Sexual Violence Partnership Board, we refreshed our compact, so our vision and mission. We built a strategy that encompassed the Violence Against Women and Girls Commission's recommendations. And then we built an action plan to deliver on those, on the recommendations, the strategy, and our vision and mission as a collective partnership. So I'm going to talk to you a little bit about what our vision and mission is. So we're a partnership board, so a group of professionals who are here to provide system-based community leadership for preventing and ending VAWG and domestic abuse and sexual violence in the city. We do this by the means of working collaboratively and innovatively to challenge culture, attitudes, and behavior, and centering the voices of those with lived experience. We do this to achieve an end to inequality and harm for everyone in Plymouth via a successful system-wide trauma-informed and person-centered response to domestic abuse, sexual violence, and VAWG, because we collectively believe that we can support people to live free from fear and abuse, and that those who harm will change their behavior. So that's sort of our vision and our mission. And so what flows from that is like certain ways of working. So our approach is based on the coordinated community response, which has been around since the 80s, and it came out of Duluth, Minnesota, and the amazing work of Ellen Pence. And the coordinated community response is a name for what we intuitively do and how we intuitively work around these issues. So the idea is that through a coordinated community response, we are trying to keep survivors safe, we're holding people who harm to account, and we're trying to prevent domestic abuse and other forms of violence against women and girls at their roots. But basically, what it says is that it is everyone's responsibility to tackle these issues, that it's no one person, system, organization, or agency that can do it. It's through every person, every organization, taking a look inside their practice, their agency, to say, what are we doing? What am I doing? What are we doing to tackle these issues? And then working collectively together with all the other folks that are doing the same. And so the process by which that's coordinated and managed is called the coordinated community response. And at the heart of it is collective responsibility. So that was the first thing we kind of said. In order to be able to deliver this mission, we got to do it together. We also take, as being a trauma-informed city, we take a trauma-informed approach and looking at the way that domestic abuse, violence against women and girls impacts people over their lifetime. And we look at intergenerational abuse and the roots and the causes, and we try to meet people where they are and taking a person-centered approach. That's really at the center of our response. And then also we take a public health approach, which in a nutshell, and I'm not a public health expert, y'all, but at the root of a public health approach is addressing the causes from an early intervention and prevention perspective. So what it is effectively is that we need to work together, we need to be trauma-informed, and we need to address this at its roots in order to have the impact that we want to have in order to achieve our mission and vision. So we work around prevention, early intervention, we deal with crisis and risk fluctuation, and we also are here to support with long-term recovery and safety. So that's how we work. We published our strategy and our action plan during the 16 days of activism last December, and these are our 8 strategic priorities. So hopefully none of this will surprise you, but we are here to increase the system-wide responsibility for these issues, meaning that's that everybody's responsibility thing. So we all want you to come on this journey with us. And my superpower is to find you a place in the coordinated community response. So if you're like, oh, Megan, I'm not exactly sure how I can be part of this, come talk to me. I will find you a place. Join the team. We want to promote positive culture change with events like this today, which means that we want to look at, we want to address why violence against women and girls happens in the first place and what we can do to change it. If you come to the VAWG team's workshop later, we're going to talk about the roots of violence against, not that I'm selling my workshop over the other two, they're all going to be amazing. But we're going to talk about the roots of violence against women and girls and how do we address those roots. And we're going to hear from women with a bit of lived experience later today. But we want to promote positive culture change. We want to ensure that we deliver support for survivors and people affected, not just adults, but children as well. We're developing a systemic approach to people causing harm, because what we know is if we just support survivors, if you just think back to my previous slide about MARIC data, we know that if we don't intervene with the people causing harm, they're just going to go on to hurt somebody else. So there's a lot going on in that arena at the moment. We're looking to improve the citywide response to justice, both through the criminal justice system and the family court process. We're looking to coordinate and have better communications. So I think that we're doing okay. Look at all the people in this room today. We have a violence against women and girls communications group that puts together a program of events and activities and workforce development every year. Just you wait, everybody. 16 days program is coming soon. There's a lot going on. But to basically make sure that people know what's available to improve their confidence and also to get connected to information and also be part of the movement in the city. So we're doing quite a bit there. And we're also looking to improve intelligence learning impact. And what that means is what we're doing making a difference to people who need it? And that's really, that's at the core of we might as well not do it if it doesn't make a difference. So that's impact and metrics is a big part of what we're improving on. And also we want to influence the wider system beyond Plymouth and be influenced by the wider system beyond Plymouth. So what that means is we want to be innovative and we want to drive change here in the city, but we also want to be on the cusp of what's going on elsewhere and bring good practice here. So those are our priorities. And so what have we done? Let's talk about this. Okay, so over the last year, we have started a number of different initiatives. One of the things that has begun really about 10 months ago was the Healthy Relationships Alliance. What the Healthy Relationships Alliance is doing is bringing together practitioners from across the city who are working with young people around healthy relationships who might be going into schools or other community venues. And what we want to do is have a more consistent offer for young people. And the goal of that group is really that every young person in Plymouth knows what and can experience a healthy relationship. So we talk about culture change. That's why that group is there, to bring that piece of work together. We have a safe accommodation group. One of the few statutory duties a local authority has around domestic abuse is around safe accommodation. So we are looking at how do we take a whole housing approach to domestic abuse across the city, and how do we ensure that if someone needs to remain in their home as they're experiencing domestic abuse, they can do so safely. And we also want to ensure that there's safe accommodation when people need to leave their homes as a result of domestic abuse. We have a steering group for that multi-agency risk assessment conference. What that is really around is improving our response to high-risk survivors of domestic abuse and people causing harm. MARIC's been around for a really long time, since 2010. And so sometimes what happens in a local area is that people can take a MARIC for granted, but your MARIC is like a temperature check or a health check of your wider system response to domestic abuse. And so what we're doing now is just taking a bit of a reflection on how healthy our MARIC is, and then what we can do to improve that, that response for high-risk victims and survivors. Workforce development and training. Wow, this is a big area of work. So hopefully next time you hear me speak, maybe during the 16 days, I'm going to be able to announce a package of free training and workforce development for anyone in the city. Currently, level 1 e-learning, which takes about 45 minutes to do, created by Verity M.A.N, is available to any professional in the city. So you can do that level 1 violence against women and girls, domestic abuse and sexual violence training for free. And hopefully by December, January, we will have a huge package of level 2 and level 3 training alongside some really specific training about how do we address these issues in an intersectional way. So what we're hoping is that every professional in the city will be able to educate themselves in a way, in multiple ways around whether that's online learning, in-person learning, or short bits of e-learning and webinars, that you will have coordinated access to improving your knowledge of these issues. So that's really exciting. Commissioning takes time, y'all. So that's why we haven't had it yet, but it is coming. We have, I talked about our domestic homicide reviews. So we have a group that sort of looks, that takes a look at new referrals coming in, takes a look at the action plans that's coming out of domestic homicides. We need that to kind of, the domestic homicides are another statutory responsibility. So we have that group to oversee that process. A number of my colleagues in this room are also involved in our global majority working group, and we had an event last week to highlight some of the recommendations for addressing survivors from Black and minoritized communities here in the city. And so we have a lot of work to do now that we've been learning together. There's a huge amount of recommendations for how we have a more inclusive and intersectional approach to domestic abuse in Plymouth. One of the big things that we've done as well is we're going to be the first area in the Southwest to have a MATAC. We love an acronym in this world. So the MATAC is a multi-agency tasking and coordination group. I think they just did it like that to be like, to mirror the MARAC, because it makes no sense as a title, but that's okay, we move beyond. The MATAC is to address high-risk, high-harm, prolific perpetrators of domestic abuse. And so what that's going to look like is that a group of professionals are going to come together on a monthly basis to case manage people causing harm, the most significant and prolific perpetrators. And so yeah, we're the first area in the Devon and Cornwall Police Force to be able to do that. It's a pilot, we're really excited about it, but it's one part of our wider program to ensure that we are addressing people causing harm. I talked about the communications group. We get together on a regular basis to sort of really understand, okay, what are you doing? What are we doing? Let's put together, let's make sure everybody knows about the events that are going on in the city. And there's lots coming up in November as part of the 16 days. We started the Domestic Abuse in Children's working group with the Safeguarding Children's Partnership, and that's to really take a look at how we can improve our response to child survivors of domestic abuse. Additionally, we have the Child Sexual Abuse Working Group, which is which is under the Safeguarding Children's Board, to take a look at that really significant and specialist area of work. And we also have the Domestic Abuse and Suicide Working Group, which is a peninsula-wide working group run by Verity, to take a look at the increase in suicides as a result of domestic abuse. So we have a number of different working streams. It's not it's definitely not like exhaustive, but those are all things that a year ago I wouldn't really be able to talk to you about. So we've come a long way, I think, in the 12 months, and I'm really, really grateful for every single professional who has shown up at a meeting, who has listened to, has responded to ideas, and has taken some leadership. So huge, huge pieces of work. Each little box on that screen represents days and hours and weeks of people's time. So yeah, I think we're hopefully headed in the right direction. So we talk about action today. So this is my final slide, everybody. And I think it's hopefully an important one. So this question I'm going to keep asking. It's the question I ask the most, and it's the question I'm going to keep asking everyone until everyone can give me a clear and consistent answer that comes from a place of like, I can't not do this. So how will you get involved in our coordinated community response to ending violence against women and girls? So many of you are already involved in number one. identifying and supporting survivors, both adult and child, people who are affected by these issues. That's a huge amount of work across the city, and I'm very, very grateful for all of you who do this work, who identify people at ever earlier stages and give them the support they need for as long as they need. Please continue the good work, and if you're not doing this, please get involved. The second thing, so how can you get involved? Well, recognizing working with the men and boys who are causing harm, and also those who are perpetrating gender inequality. So, we recognize that it's not all men who are perpetrating abuse or reinforcing gender stereotypes, but it is all men's responsibility to decide on the role they're going to play in addressing gender inequality and ending VAWG. So this conference is designed to support you in making the choice and informing actions for how you will get involved in this work and be part of our local coordinated community response to ending VAWG. And I just really hope that you hear multiple calls of action today. So going back to recognizing working with people causing harm. So we have a HIMSA who's over here. They are our specialist organization in the city for working with people causing harm. The police work with people causing harm all the time. Probation, Fear Free, lots of folks are working with people causing harm. But I would ask everyone in this space to not make that someone else's work, to not make a referral to a HIMSA when you recognize that someone might be perpetrating abusive behavior, but to think about and to educate yourself and to go on training, which will be available soon, about how you can work safely with people causing harm. How can you build your skills to identify, disrupt, and challenge men and boys who are demonstrating harmful behavior? Come and talk to me. Come and talk to my team. We can support you. It's not just about, though, tackling the more acute behaviors and crimes. It's also about looking for ways to address the wider obstacles to equality, perhaps in ways closer to home. So such as the unequal sharing of unpaid work, like domestic and parental tasks within households. It's about working with organizations like M.A.N Culture to understand the macro and micro expressions of gender inequality and taking steps to change them in your personal and professional lives. And so the third call to action is really for the men and boys in this space today. Human rights are universal, as is their defense. In the same way that the fight against racism has no borders, the fight against sexism, gender inequality, and men's violence against women and girls is open to all. And I invite you, especially the men in the audience today, to be proactive agents of change and mobilize for the rights of women and girls and the achievement of gender equality. So as you move through this conference, I invite you to be inspired. I invite you to make notes. I invite you to take down specific actions and then do them. This conference is only as impactful as what happens when we leave here at 4 p.m. today. So I issue this call of action to all of you to allow today to help you define where you stand and how you will get involved in ending gender equality and men's violence against women and girls. I will walk alongside you, shoulder to shoulder in this. You are not alone, but it's every single individual's responsibility to come and walk in this movement together. I'm delighted and inspired to be here today to do this work alongside you, and I wish you all an excellent conference. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Meghan. Brilliant as always. Can we just give Meghan a final round of applause, please? So during that, I was critiquing my welcome. I forgot a couple of things, so I've had to kind of score myself about a 7 out of 10 for the welcome. But so things I forgot: podcast corner. So during the breaks, Cadus and Scott will be doing our podcast. But the ask is, if anybody wants to be part of that, just come and speak to one of us, and we can get you a spot during one of the breaks to just have a chat with Cadus and Scott about anything you want to discuss. And then there was a thank you. There'll be loads of thank yous throughout the day. I'm not going to do them all at once, but just for Dave Tetley, who is here today from 51 Studio, for all of our new marketing graphics. While they're not Well, they're not completely new because it's still the same theme that we had from the last conference. Hopefully you can see how that threads through, but thank you for Dave for his work.